always amazed at the opinions of people when they go to Egypt. And when I first was over there I think I was over there in 2016 the first time. Not only was I shocked, I mean, times was suspended for me because I couldn't believe the Great Pyramids. I couldn't believe the size of the Sphinx. I couldn't believe the temples. There's so much that was just beyond comprehension for me. And I made a mental note that I needed to go back. And I was fortunate because I was able to go through my tour company every year, and we've gone every year except for last year. I don't think we went. But my guest today actually had a chance to go in 2017. Not only was he impressed, but he was, I would say, shocked. We're going to find out today how shocked he was at the technology, at the sheer size of the Giza Plateau and the pyramids, as well as a number of other places that he went. And he has left us some interesting points of view in his videos, YouTube videos, and also a series of books called The Land of Chem. My guest today is Geoffrey Drumm. He's coming to us from Japan. And I have been getting a number of people on my channel and through emails going, you got to have this guy on the program. And I was following up and looking at some of his research, and I thought, you know what? This is something I do have to have on my program. So we have him with us today. Geoffrey, welcome to Earth Ancients. Great to have you on the program.
Thank you, Cliff. I appreciate that. Usually in my interviews, I see good evening from Egypt, as my wife and I have been living in Egypt full time for 3 years now. But today is good morning from Japan. We're on the other side of the world and starting our second extensive research expedition covering some of the ancient structures here in Japan.
Yeah, that's very cool. I've only spoken to one person who is in Japan that's really looked at the megalithic culture there. They don't really embrace it very much. The locals don't very really embrace it. So I'd love to see what you're up to. Let's talk about Egypt. You were there in 2017. What was the motivation to head to Cairo and the Giza Plateau?
Yeah, so my first research expedition to Egypt was in 2017. And at that point, I had already been, researching and studying the alternative theories about the function of the Egyptian pyramids. And I finally decided that I had to go and see it for myself. And through a serendipitous series of events, I was finally able to get to Egypt. And I did a tour with the great Yusuf Awian. And everybody knows Yusuf in the ancient alternative history community. So I contacted him. He was my tour guide for my first research expedition to Egypt. And, I was going to investigate the alternative hypotheses that focus on the Great Pyramid of Giza. And most researchers who talk about the function of the Egyptian pyramids focus exclusively on the Great Pyramid, as if, all of the other ones simply don't exist or if they are non-functional structures. And in my opinion, that's a huge deficiency in the discussion of the function of the Egyptian pyramids is, just looking at one as if it has all of these magical properties and all of the other ones are insignificant or non-functional. And in my book and on my YouTube channel, I talk about the function of all of the Egyptian pyramids under the umbrella of physics and chemistry, from the step pyramid to the red pyramid, bent pyramid, great pyramid, and central pyramid, as an interconnected system of chemical manufacturing structures. And my intention was to investigate these hypotheses about the function of the Great Pyramid that have been proposed by, researchers like Christopher Dunn. And, he's basically the godfather of the alternative theories about the function of the Great Pyramid. So I wanted to see it for myself and see if there was anything to, the proposal that the Great Pyramid, long story short, everybody thinks that the Great Pyramid was producing electricity, which is a hypothesis that I disagree with. I think it was using electricity and the product was chemicals, specifically a solution of dilute sulfuric acid within the Great Pyramid. And we can get into why that's the case, as we talk. So my first site that I visited in Egypt is a site called Abu Sir. And I don't know if you've ever been out to the Abu Sir Pyramid Complex.
Yeah.
And I happened to stumble across an artifact that's a red quartzite collection bowl. And this collection bowl is connected to a red quartzite conduit system that runs below the black basalt paving of the Pyramid of Niuserre at Abu Sir. And clearly, this is an artifact that is for the conduction and collection of fluids of some sort, because it's a liquid channel or a liquid conduit that empties out into this collection bowl. So whatever was flowing through that channel was important enough for them to carve this exquisite red quartzite artifact, and they were collecting this material. And for a civilization that lives on the bank of the Nile River, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever that this is a rainwater collection system. And there's a very complex network of conduits that run through the pyramid complex at Abu Sir. There's the red quartzite one that runs below the pyramid of Niuserre, and there was also a copper piping network that runs below the paving of the pyramid of Sahure. So there was something going on there where there was a complex network that was utilized for the distribution of fluid chemicals. And that was my initial thought as soon as I saw this, collection bowl. It was ancient alchemy.
Yeah.
That they were producing something within these pyramids that was incredibly important. And we know that Egypt was the birthplace of chemistry. Our modern word chemistry literally has its etymological origin in the word chem, the ancient word for Egypt, Khem, which led to the word for alchemy and our modern word for chemistry. And Egypt, even according to the conventional dynastic Egyptian timeline and historical narrative, it was the birthplace of chemistry. It was the first people to manufacture pharmaceuticals, synthetic pigments like Egyptian blue was the first chemical compound ever produced in the historical record. They were also making cosmetics and all sorts of chemical related products in the dynastic Egyptian period. And the title of my book, The Land of Chem, is a play on words for the original name for Egypt, the Land of Chem, because it's the land of chemistry. So we visited Abu Sir, and this idea kind of popped into my head that, maybe the Egyptian pyramids didn't have anything to do with electricity, but they were rather producing chemicals, and they were collecting these chemicals.
Let's talk about that. So you're in the bus with you, Yusuf, and you're driving up the hill to go to the plateau. And you get out of the bus, you're standing in front of the pyramid. What was your first impression of Khufu and Khafre pyramids?
Well, so the first one we went to after Abu Sir wasn't the Giza pyramid complex quite yet. The next structures that we visited were the pyramids of Dashur, the red pyramid and the bent pyramid.
Okay.
So that was really my first experience getting up and close to one of the major. So the pyramids of Abu Sir are smaller. Again, according to the conventional timeline, those are 5th dynasty structures that were built after the pyramids on the Giza plateau.
Right.
And they're a little bit smaller. They're about the size of the Menkaure pyramid, the final pyramid on the Giza plateau. So those were incredibly impressive. And there's a very complex, engineering network going on with those pyramids. But my first experience really getting up close in person with one of the big boys was the red and bent pyramids in Dashur. And I remember I didn't know that we were going to be able to go inside of these things.
Yeah.
So, I'm going with Yusuf. We go out there and we start walking up the stairs to go inside of the red pyramid. And as soon as we went inside those chambers, there is chemical staining all over the walls of the interior chambers of the red pyramid. And there's a very, very strong smell of ammonia, which people usually attribute that to bats. But, fast forward 6 years from 2017, and we now have an immense database of chemical analysis data that proves that the staining inside of the red pyramid has absolutely nothing to do with bats, bat guano, or bat urine, nor is the smell of ammonia emanating from anything related to bats. The chemical staining on the walls is a complex mixture of metal oxides. And, I don't want to get too far off track, but if anybody's listening, go check out the Land of Chem YouTube channel. And I have a whole playlist called Chemical Analysis Data that presents all of the chemical analysis that we've accumulated over the past 6 years that support this hypothesis about chemical manufacturing.
Yeah.
And I remember, so in my opinion, the bent pyramid, walking up to the bent pyramid is far more impressive than going up to the pyramids on the Giza plateau because of the casing stones.
Yeah. I've been there many
times. People may not know that
it's fantastic.
The bent pyramid is the one pyramid that still has the vast majority of its original casing stones still intact. And you can look at the edges of the bent pyramid and the precision with which the external casing stones were executed. It's like a razor blade running down the edge of the pyramid. You could take a piece of paper and run it along that edge and it would slice right down that piece of paper. And the precision of the alignment of those casing stones is really unbelievable. There's a specific place that I like to stand on the northeastern corner, and there's a place where you can put your feet and look right up at the edge. And again, it's just like a razor blade going up the edge of the pyramid. So that was really my first experience, and I was blown away. You watch YouTube videos of
Yeah.
other people going out and exploring these things, and you study diagrams, but there's really nothing like being there in person.
So,
And,
so
not so
Yusuf,
shameless plug, I have another tour coming up in November.
oh,
Um,
okay.
13-day tour, private special permission access into the Great Pyramid. We got private special permission access to Abu Sir, full Nile cruise, Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt, everything from Abu Simbel to the pyramids on the Giza Plateau. So if anybody's interested, send me an email, contact@thelandofchem.com, subject line
We'll
2025 Egypt.
a link. We'll put a link for people to register at the end of the show, so people can go and sign up. So, what was your impression of the bent pyramid? The level of precision in not only the outer casing stones, but as you go into the guts of the pyramid, you obviously
Yeah.
were inside of it. Everything seems to be very precise. Why would they do that? Is it an engine of some kind, or is it more of a processing center, do you think?
So, in my opinion, and according to my research and the hypotheses that I've presented in my book and on my YouTube channel, the internal chambers of the pyramids of Egypt are chemical reaction chambers.
Mhm.
And there's very meticulous engineering, physics based engineering that went into the design of these chambers. For example, the red and bent pyramids both have, well, it doesn't look like this now inside of the bent pyramid because there is a tremendous amount of internal erosion on the upper primary chamber inside of the bent pyramid.
Mhm.
And your number one question should be, what caused all that erosion? The inside of the upper primary reaction chamber of the bent pyramid is completely eroded out on the inside. It was originally a pristine tiered upper corbelled vault ceiling, basically like what we see in the red pyramid. And after my experience inside of these two pyramids, I began to look at it from a function of basic physics. So when you look at the upper vault of these chambers, the volume of the chamber decreases the higher you go up in the chamber. And
Mhm.
if you look at the staining patterns inside of the red pyramid, there's very specific staining patterns that indicate denser staining in the upper portion of the chamber. So this to me was an indication all of the staining inside the red pyramid is evidence of the chemical reactions that were occurring inside of the structure. So if you take a gas, for example, in a box or a container of volume A, and you compress that gas into half of the volume, you increase the temperature and pressure, which is a very basic mechanism of operation to drive chemical reactions. We do the exact same thing today. When you want to push a chemical reaction forward, you increase the temperature and you increase the pressure. And that's exactly what they were doing inside of the reaction chambers, specifically in the red and bent pyramids of Dashur, was manipulating temperature and pressure by creating something called an adiabatic compression reaction,
Hmm.
which utilized water to compress gases into these upper vaults that have reduced volume in the highest portion of the chamber. So that was the reason behind the engineering that went into the design of the internal reaction chambers of the red and bent pyramids. And of course, there's also sophisticated engineering inside of the Great Pyramid, specifically the implementation of red granite. And we can talk about that as well.
Yeah, let's
Probably the
talk. Let's
simplest
talk about
structure.
Del Shore a little bit more because are
Sure.
you saying that they are combusting something in there, or is it more that they're combining volatile chemicals and the results are some form of chemistry that they're using for some processing of something? I don't know.
Yeah, so let me give a quick rundown of the function of the structures and the products, just so you
Okay.
have some background on, kind of the overall scope of my work, and then I can jump into explaining exactly what happens in terms of the chemical reactions inside the reaction chambers.
You want to
So the
share
step here,
screen?
yeah, I have a ton of slides, but Cliff, if I get into slides, we're going to go way more than an hour. Anybody
That's okay.
who's watched my podcast appearances before, I can easily go 5 hours as soon as I start getting into slides. So let me just give you a quick overview, and then Yeah, I have a ton of slides up here too.
Well, show
So
us a
basically,
few.
it's everything starts with the step pyramid in Saqqara, and the step pyramid was designed for the extraction of bedrock deposits of methane.
Hmm.
That methane was then converted into aqueous ammonia inside of the red pyramid. That aqueous ammonia was then transformed, and I've proposed two different hypotheses for the products of the bent pyramid. The first being ammonium bicarbonate or urea, and the second being nitric acid. And then on the Giza Plateau within the Great Pyramid, we have the production of a dilute solution of sulfuric acid. And within the Central Pyramid, the Khafra Pyramid, they were producing hydrochloric acid. For anyone that's immediately questioning the chemical manufacturing of these products, the internal reaction chambers of the Great Pyramid and Central Pyramid are actually coated with a chemically resistant coating compound that was based in calcium sulfate. Again, we have chemical analysis data of this material that's been discovered inside the Great Pyramid, specifically the Queen's Chamber and the Grand Gallery, and inside the Central Pyramids. So yeah, let me pull up this deck here, and then I can go into the engineering of our modern day Haber process, which is the modern industrial scale chemical manufacturing process for producing ammonia. And you'll see that the engineering of the modern day Haber process perfectly emulates this ancient chemical engineering technology that was implemented in the Red Pyramid of Dashur. So let me see here. Share. So can you turn on my sharing? It says sharing not turned on.
Here you go. Yeah, I'm really curious because these are complex chemicals. I'm wondering what they're using them for.
Yeah. So in terms of methane, there's a variety of applications for methane, specifically as a domestic fuel source, basic stuff that we would use natural gas for today, heating, lighting, cooking food, etc. But methane is actually one of the most important syngases that we have today because it's utilized for the production of hydrogen. So today in the modern day Haber process, they use methane as a syngas that starts the reaction process that creates ammonia. And
Huh.
again, going back to the Haber process, during the early 1900s in our modern industrial revolution, ammonia was one of the first chemicals being synthesized on an industrial scale. And ammonia is the basis of all of our fertilizers today.
Hmm.
Fertilizer being one of the most important chemicals that was ever synthesized on the face of this planet, not only in the modern time, but also to the ancient people. So we have methane gas, a fuel source, and also a chemical synthesis gas. Then we have in Dashur the production of fertilizers. First, aqueous ammonia. Aqueous ammonia also has applications in things like bitumen processing. So we know that bitumen was used throughout the ancient world for things like shipbuilding, and they utilize aqueous ammonia to eliminate the acidic compounds in the processing of bitumen and crude oil. Because, for example, when you're building your ship, you don't want to have acidic, corrosive compounds in your bitumen that would deteriorate the wood of the ship. So they use aqueous ammonia to neutralize those acidic compounds, but it also has applications in things like copper mining. Leach
Hmm.
mining of copper can be done with aqueous ammonia. So it has a ton of applications. And then in the bent pyramid, they were transforming that aqueous ammonia into a solid compound fertilizer. Again, depending on the complexity of the chemical reaction, the easiest one to produce is ammonium bicarbonate. And a little bit more complex with higher temperatures and pressures is a compound known as urea. And we still use urea today as one of the most important fertilizers that's ever been produced. So
Wow,
we
here we
have
are thinking that they're producing energy and they're producing their power devices like core drills and saws and things like that. And you're on a whole different level, which is
practical.
agricultural chemicals. That's a fascinating theory.
Yep. So basic stuff. And people often underestimate how important chemicals are to our modern society.
Mhm.
If we were not producing agricultural fertilizers on an industrial scale, our civilization as we know it today would not exist.
Yeah.
And this also involves the number one most important chemical that we synthesize today is sulfuric acid. And that was being produced in the Giza Plateau Pyramid Complex. The Great Pyramid producing a dilute solution of sulfuric acid, and the Central Pyramid producing a dilute solution of hydrochloric acid, with the main applications for these being metallurgy and mining.
Mining. Amazing.
Correct, for processing metals.
Okay, well, I've given you the screen here. You can
Yeah, absolutely.
move along.
So I can run through this. I don't want to skip a bunch of slides. So my work doesn't specifically focus on the function of the Egyptian pyramids. Um, I have a comprehensive overview of all the types of ancient structures across the world and this ancient technology. So my hypothesis is basically that after the cataclysm at the end of the last ice age, the survivors of this civilization were implementing stone technology that was based in chemistry and physics to
Hmm.
not only revitalize their civilization, but also to rebuild the civilization. So, all of these technological stone systems, starting with stone circles and culminating with the apex execution of the chemistry technology in the Egyptian pyramids, were utilized to rebuild civilization after this cataclysm. And it starts with stone circles, which, in my opinion, were, well, again, not necessarily in my opinion, according to the research and the physics-based mechanisms of operation and the chemical properties of these materials. So stone is a dielectric material, which means it can store electric fields. And stone circles were designed to accumulate positive surface charges to attract negatively charged lightning strikes. And it has absolutely nothing to do with attempting to harness the electricity, but there's a very specific atmospheric chemical reaction that occurs during lightning strikes that produces fertilizer from the air. It's called nitrogen fixing. So that's why we have stone circles, thousands of stone circles across Europe, and even stone circles all over Japan, which is one of the reasons that I'm here, is because Japan also has stone circles, passage chamber reactions, passage chamber reactors. So basically, Newgrange is what I call a passage chamber reactor, which is a proto pyramid. It was the earliest implementation of an internal reactor that was designed to produce chemicals. And we can get into what I think Newgrange is also. But they also have pyramid structures here in Japan, specifically Pyramid Kuramanta, which was scanned and excavated in the 1990s. And they found internal reaction chambers inside the Pyramid Kuramanta.
Hmm.
So starting with stone circles, there was actually proof of this lightning at stone circles. The University of St. Andrews did a geomagnetic analysis of the Calanase stone circle, and they found a magnetic signature at the center of the stone circle from repeated lightning strikes on the structure. And at the center of all these stone circles, you have standing stones or menhir, right? These huge obelisk type structures.
Right.
And they all have the same function, which is essentially a lightning rod. And that's why the altar stone of Stonehenge, there's been a lot of conversation about why they dragged the altar stone of Stonehenge all the way from Scotland. They've recently discovered the origin place of this altar stone. It's because it's filled with mica. And mica is an exceptionally good dielectric material that has high heat resistance. And this is just some pictures of some of the standing stone and menhir across the world that are all scarred from lightning strikes. And you see this obelisk here. This is the Washington Monument, which also still gets struck by lightning, which is indicative of the original purpose of the Egyptian obelisk, which is this lightning rod technology taken to its pinnacle execution. So I'm going to skip forward here because if I get started in this presentation, it'll take us 5 hours. So nitrogen fixing, right? Which is basically when lightning strikes, there's a tremendous amount of energy when that happens, and it transforms atmospheric nitrogen into water-soluble fertilizers in the air. And the rain brings these atmospheric fertilizers down for agricultural areas. So they built these stone circle systems to selectively determine the location for lightning strikes to create fertilizer from the air for the revitalization of agricultural areas. This was the ritual of the ancient stone circle system. And I'm going to fast forward through all this stuff. And we find these stone circles all over Japan that were constructed by a civilization known as the Jomon. Have you ever heard of the Jomon civilization?
Yeah.
So basically coinciding with the same Neolithic civilization that inhabited, Northwest Europe around the same time. The Jomon date back possibly as far as 30,000 BC to around 3000 BCE. So this was a civilization that existed not only during the last ice age, but they survived the cataclysm into the post-ice age, post-younger Dryas time period. And they were the ones that built these stone circle systems that are identical to what we find in Europe all over Japan. So there's a direct connection between the Neolithic civilization in Japan and the Neolithic stone circle and passage chamber building civilization in Europe, which is a very interesting discussion because according to conventional history, there is no connection between these two civilizations, but they were building technology that has the exact same basis.
Right.
So I know you've also been interested in Teotihuacan. I recently did an episode on Teotihuacan explaining the function of Teotihuacan and the symbolism of Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl. So Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan, basically the same deity. One is Aztec, one is Mayan. It's the exact same thing as the Japanese dragon, which is an ancient symbol for lightning. And at the pyramid of Chichen Itza, you have the descent of Kukulkan that happens on the spring equinox.
Right.
This is a symbolic representation of when lightning arrives to the area, because at the spring equinox, that is the beginning of the Mayan agricultural season when the rains would arrive. So the descent of the feathered serpent at Chichen Itza is an esoteric symbol of the arrival of this lightning deity, the feathered serpent, the same thing as the Japanese dragon. All right, so this is a bit of a long presentation. I did a comprehensive overview of my work recently in episode 165 on the channel. We just got back from Malta. That's why you see one here. We were in the Hypogeum. I've recently presented a hypothesis on the Hypogeum. This one's talking about Silbury Hill.
Yeah. So your theory on these chemical processing plants is that they were more interested in fertilizers for agriculture, but also processing chemicals like ammonia and other chemical combinations for what? What would they be using these unique chemicals for?
Yeah, so again, the main application for ammonia-based compounds is for fertilizer, agricultural fertilizer, but ammonia also has applications in, again, things like processing bitumen, which was an incredibly important material to the ancient world for shipbuilding, and also for processes like leach mining of copper. So when it comes to my hypothesis, the application for all of these chemicals is either agricultural or for metallurgy and mining applications. Essentially, the Giza Plateau is a huge metallurgical, mining, and industrial chemical manufacturing operation.
So I'd love to see in a diagram of the Great Pyramid how, and I want you to give us some details because you've made some wonderful observations of areas where canals were cut in the bedrock and chemicals flowed into the Great Pyramid, as well as water. And then I guess there's an area where it would come out after it was processed. So I'm curious to see what you have identified.
Yeah, so I actually have some slides in here that animate the process. So here we go. This is the part of the slide deck that has the Egyptian pyramids.
Oh, here we go.
So we'll start with the step pyramid complex in Saqqara, which again was for the extraction of bedrock deposits of methane. And one of the reasons that Egypt was selected for the construction location for the Egyptian pyramids is due to the abundant natural resources in Egypt, specifically hydrocarbon deposits, which they're still mining and extracting today. Egypt and the methane industry go hand in hand in terms of the petroleum and methane extraction out in the western desert of Egypt. But also on the Giza Plateau, there are hydrogen sulfide deposits on the Giza Plateau. There's a cave and tunnel network that runs below the Giza Plateau that is a source of hydrogen sulfide gas. That hydrogen sulfide gas is the raw material that was being utilized within the Great Pyramid for the production of sulfuric acid. So I'm going to run a quick animation to show you how the step pyramid works. There's an external reservoir that surrounds the step pyramid. That's the source of the water for this bedrock methane extraction process. And the water was being purified in a structure known as Gizr el Mudir, which is a huge rectangular enclosure out to the southwest of the Step Pyramid in Saqqara. It's a massive enclosure, and I've proposed that Gizr El Mudir was a water treatment plant. So you have this complex network of tunnels, vertical shafts, and then the central rectangular collection chamber here in the center of the Red Pyramid. Well, there's a shaft that leads into this subterranean system that is connected into the external reservoir that fed water down into the Step Pyramid system. And by manipulating these 11 vertical pump shafts, they could decrease and increase the pressure inside of the system. It's basically the same as our modern day fracking today, where we increase and decrease pressure within the system to release these bedrock deposits of methane gas. And by repeating the process, they were able to extract these bedrock deposits of methane that are located below the Step Pyramid. And if you look at the bedrock inside of the Step Pyramid, it is black, and it is indicative of the ancient carboniferous deposits inside of that bedrock that create these methane deposits. So now moving on to the Red Pyramid. So this is a diagram of our modern day Haber process, where that methane that was being extracted from the Step Pyramid or from the bedrock below the Step Pyramid is converted into ammonia. So the Egyptian pyramids are a series of interconnected chemical manufacturing facilities that work in sequence, where the first chemical being produced is then transformed into the second chemical and the third chemical, where the product of each pyramid becomes the initial reactant in the next pyramid, right? So the Step Pyramid, you're extracting the methane. The methane becomes the initial reactant in the facility producing ammonia. And that's exactly what we do today. And this right here is the configuration of the original apparatus that was developed by Fritz Haber for the synthesis of ammonia. And if you look, it has 3 chambers, and the third one is elevated above the other 2. This is the exact same configuration as the chambers inside of the Red Pyramid. And both Fritz Haber and Carl Bosch, who was also involved in the Haber-Bosch process and one of the godfathers of modern industrial scale chemical manufacturing, they used to travel to Egypt.
Really?
So the men who developed our modern day industrial chemical manufacturing technology, I believe, reverse engineered it by studying the Egyptian pyramids. And that is where we get all of our advances in modern industrial scale technology, is by reverse engineering the Egyptian pyramids.
Do you think that there are a number of underground canals and storage units to hold this material? Because we don't see a lot. You're showing a lot of pipe works and things like that. I've seen some of them at Saqqara, the pyramid there, but you're showing a whole bunch of exit and entry canal systems. Are they just not? They haven't found them yet, or what? What's your feeling on that?
So it's been anecdotally reported that there are underground shaft systems that connect all of the Egyptian pyramids. For example, Yusuf Awiyan's father, Abdel Hakim Awiyan, used to say that they used to be able to, go through, like, for example, from Saqqara all the way up to Giza, there's an underground shaft system. And we see evidence of this all over the Giza Plateau, where there are not only deep vertical bedrock shafts, but also horizontal passages that are still running below the surface. And we have a contact at the Ministry of Antiquities who told us on camera during one of our tours, for example, that there's an underground shaft system that connects the Great Pyramid into the Sphinx enclosure.
Right.
So there's a huge network of subterranean infrastructure that connects all of these pyramids. And for example, below the Red Pyramid, below the final synthesis chamber, I 100% believe there is still a hidden chamber deep underground below that structure. And that's one of the reasons that they excavated the floor out of that chamber, is that they were looking for and following the shaft that leads into the extraction and collection chamber system.
Wow. So what's your opinion of the SARS scan of the Great Pyramid and also the Khafre pyramid? I know you've seen it. I saw some photographs on your YouTube channel. They're showing deep underground shafts and structures and buildings and things like that.
Yeah, so I actually met these guys recently. I met both Armando Mei and Filippo Biondi at their conference in Malta. And I've actually been following their work since their first paper was published in 2022. A lot of people just sort of jumped on the bandwagon with this new scan of the Khafra Pyramid, but these guys have been around for a long time, and they originally scanned the Great Pyramid back in 2022, and I think it's fascinating. I'm very excited by the potential of the technology, but I'm also very skeptical of some of the conclusions that they've presented and also of the capabilities of the technology. For example, there's a big issue with the detection of the known chambers. For example, their recent scans of the Khafra Pyramid don't show any of the known chambers.
Yeah.
It can't detect the chambers that we know are there, which is a big problem. And Armando made a statement on Facebook attempting to explain this by saying, the satellite radar is being absorbed by the bedrock below the Khafra Pyramid, and they are unable to detect the chambers. Those chambers are in less than 10 meters of bedrock. So if the radar signal is being absorbed by 10 meters of bedrock, how do they expect people to believe that they're able to scan a kilometer or 2 kilometers into the bedrock if you can't show us what we know below the pyramid in 10 meters of bedrock? So I think there's some positives, and this is stuff that I've discussed with these guys personally. I have a WhatsApp text group going with both Armando and Filippo because we've been in touch since we met in Malta. And I've discussed all of this stuff with them publicly and privately, and they're well aware of these deficiencies. And it's just going to require more proof of concept.
Right.
The more structures they scan and the more that they can show people that it can accurately detect the things we know, the more reliable the ability to detect things that we don't know.
Right. I hear you.
So that's kind of my long story short on the SAR people.
I appreciate that. Can you do show us the details of the Great Pyramid that you have in on your website, but also in a video presentation? You've taken some photographs of entering and exiting canals that are open that were cut into the what you call the temple outside of the Khufu pyramid. I'd love to hear more about that because that's kind of like the foundation of your theory of these as chemical processing centers, which is these delivery canals, I'll call them.
Yeah, so let me see here. I'm trying to think what would be a good slide deck. I didn't want to prepare a specific presentation because I don't like, the presentation to guide the conversation. I prefer it to go the other way around.
Yeah.
But so, for example, running below the Eastern Temple, the black basalt floor of the Eastern Temple, there's a similar conduit network to what we find at Abu Sir, right? These channels that run below the temple, again, which is for the distribution of chemical solutions across the Giza Plateau.
Hmm.
And I think this one, let me share my screen here. So another important part of my work is are you familiar with the iron veins of the Giza Plateau?
I didn't know there were iron veins.
All over the Giza Plateau, huge deposits of iron all over the Giza Plateau.
Were they
So
able to form
this is a
iron?
picture.
Were they because we don't really have iron tools that I know of. Or
Well,
maybe
so they
they
actually discovered an iron sheet inside of the Great Pyramid that was wedged between some blocks. And they did a chemical analysis of this piece of iron, and it's actually high carbon iron, which is steel. The carbon content in this piece of iron that they found is indicative of steel. And I 100% believe that they had iron tools because there's iron all over the Giza Plateau. And as I mentioned, the Giza Plateau is a mining operation.
Hmm.
It is a chemical manufacturing and mining operation that was designed to extract the immense deposits of iron and other metals on the Giza Plateau. And we have I'll run through this deck here that shows the chemical analysis of the variety of metals that we found on the Giza Plateau, which also includes gold and silver. Basically, any metal that you can name has been discovered in the chemical analysis data. So this is a picture I took from a recent. Yeah, go ahead.
I want you to give us the timeline because in the book, Land of Chem, you say
Yep,
that this is like 7,000 BC is
correct.
at the peak of this operation. That's roughly
Correct.
9,500 years ago.
Yep.
So that
So,
is, are you saying this is post catastrophe? These are the survivors.
yes,
Okay, so these are the survivors of the devastation that wiped out a good portion of the world. And so,
correct. So,
where who?
generally speaking, I think that the Egyptian pyramids were fully operational from around 8,500 BC to around 5,300 BC, which is a
Okay,
time period in Egypt and Africa known as the African Humid Period. And there was significantly more rainfall in the upper eastern Sahara. And the Sahara actually wasn't a desert during that time period, it was
hmm,
a rich, lush, giant area of agricultural land.
hmm,
And the desert was being terraformed during the Saharan wet period from a desert into arable, agricultural, fertilized land using rain, weather manipulation that's directly connected to the Egyptian pyramids. So in my work, I also talk about the White Horse Hills of Wiltshire, England, and cumulonimbus thunderstorm generators.
hmm.
And the Giza Plateau is also configured as one of these cumulonimbus thunderstorm and lightning storm generators. So they were able to create thunderstorms, which brought not only rain, but lightning to specific areas. So going back to the time period, they were also using these ammonia based fertilizers during this time period to fertilize the entire upper eastern Sahara that was literally being terraformed again, transformed from a desert into a giant farm
Wow.
from around 8,500 BC to 5,300 BC. And then around 5,300 BC, the Sahara begins to turn back into a desert. There are a number of cataclysms around this time period. And that is when I think the Egyptian pyramids were inoperational. Something happened. There was a big disaster that caused the infrastructure that operated the Egyptian pyramids to become inoperational. So let's say that the Egyptian pyramids were designed to operate with a specific amount of water during this time period when there's a lot of water in Egypt. If for some reason the rain stops and the water level decreases, the calibration of your chemical reaction systems would no longer work. That is also when we begin to see the start of the dynastic period around 3,500 BC, where the people were moving out of the upper eastern Sahara back to the area around the Nile River. And that's what we see with the Narmer Palette around 3,500 BC is the reunification of Upper and Lower Egypt and the beginning of the dynastic Egyptian period. But at this time, the pyramids were already built and inoperational and were re-inhabited by the dynastic Egyptian civilization.
So the dynastics must have been educated or found the blueprints or operating texts on how to run this stuff, I guess, right?
I 100% think they still knew what they were. And I also have a suspicion that during the dynastic period, they were utilizing the pyramids as temples of initiation.
Yeah.
So this is a picture right here. On the left, this is a sample of hematite in the Egyptian Museum. And here on the right is a huge chunk of hematite that I picked up on the Giza Plateau. There is a huge iron vein network that spreads across the Giza Plateau. And we've actually found fulgurites in this iron vein network. Do you know what a fulgurite is?
I don't.
A fulgurite is fossilized lightning. So we have found evidence of lightning strikes on the Giza Plateau. The power source of the Egypt. So let me go back to the basic premise here. The pyramids of Egypt were not producing electricity. The product was chemicals, but they were harnessing nature's electricity from telluric currents and lightning. And we have found direct evidence of lightning strikes on the pyramids and in the Giza Plateau with these fulgurites, fossilized lightning all over the Giza Plateau.
Interesting.
So these are some of the samples that we've taken of this iron vein network on the Giza Plateau from these boat pits. This is another anomalous feature on the Giza Plateau are these so-called boat pits. Well, these boat pits are actually directly connected into this iron vein network. This is a huge deposit here on the eastern side of the Khafra pyramid, on the southern side of the Eastern Temple. All of this material in this pit where I'm standing is all iron oxide. This is a picture of me standing inside of one of these pits with extreme acidic erosion leading down into this pit. And this entire pit is filled with iron oxide and other metal ore minerals. This is a picture of one of the veins. This huge vein of iron is about 1.5 feet in diameter. And these huge veins run all over the Giza Plateau. And this, again, it looks very much like a pipe, an ancient corroded pipe. But this is, well, there's subject to debate on how these things were formed. And I won't get too far off track, but this is a huge vein of iron. This is the other side of that vein. All of this is metal ore. And essentially, these iron veins are the electrical circuitry of the Giza Plateau. So these are some of the chemical analysis samples that show things like nickel, lead. We found platinum in these veins. There's also neodymium, praseodymium, all of these rare earth minerals. We found thorium. This one also has neodymium and cerium, lanthanum, iron.
So what is the volume of these semi-precious metals? Are we talking just enough for a local civilization, or were they distributing it around the world?
So the volume of these iron ore deposits below the Giza Plateau is immense, but the chemical manufacturing and mining operation is not limited to the deposits found on the Giza Plateau. I believe that they were mining this material from all over Africa, and it was being delivered to the Giza Plateau for processing. So, for example, these deep vertical bedrock pits adjacent to the causeway of the Central Pyramid, those are leach mining pits where the ore material could be placed into these leach mining pits filled with acidic solutions, which is why if you look at these pits, they're all eroded out. The walls of these pits are completely eroded from acidic erosion. So they were using these pits to leach mine metals on the Giza Plateau. But to give you an idea, this sample here is 41% silver. This one's 58% silver. This one is 70% silver. So we have very high, pure concentration of precious metals. And these are samples of gold that are found in these iron ore deposits on the Giza Plateau. All of these samples were taken from the Giza Plateau. This one is 55% gold. So again, this is more images of this vein network. So here is a silicate microsphere from the fulgurites. So when lightning hits sand and other bedrock material, it fuses the silica particles and creates these fulgurites. It's fossilized lightning. It's basically fused silica. And in this fused silica, we found these silica microspheres, which is direct evidence for lightning strikes on the Giza Plateau and the transmission of high voltage electrical current through this iron vein network.
So are they distributing electricity knowingly and controlling it and turning it on and off, or is it random?
100%. So I'll show you in just a second a map. So I've also extensively mapped not only the conduit system, but also this iron vein network. So this is a diagram of the Osiris shaft.
Right.
And these iron veins go down into the Osiris shaft. So this is the second level of the Osiris shaft that has these 6 housings. This image here is showing the iron veins that go from the surface down into the housings in the Osiris shaft. This is part of that iron vein electric circuitry network. So let's see here. Okay, so the map. So the core, right? So we know that the Egyptian pyramids were built on a mound of bedrock. At the core of all of the Egyptian pyramids, they utilized the existing bedrock, the Ben stone, the primordial mound of creation. So at the center of all these pyramids, there's a huge mound of bedrock. And the core bedrock of the Great Pyramid and the Central Pyramids are permeated with these iron deposits. And I have extensive documentation on my channel showing evidence from both inside the Central Pyramid and inside the Great Pyramid of these iron veins. So the iron veins start at the core and they branch out, connecting into the boat pits. They connect into the satellite pyramids. They connect into other structures across the Giza Plateau. They connect down into the Osiris shaft. There's a huge vein that connects the Great Pyramid and the Central Pyramid. And then there's veins that lead from inside of the central pyramid that go down into the so-called boat pits. They go through the Eastern Temple. So this is a huge network of, again, it's iron oxide now, which is a dielectric material. However, this system works very much like a Lichtenberg figure. So not to get too deep into the weeds on the complex electrical engineering here, but when you have a dielectric material, like wood, for example, and you induce a high voltage electric current, it creates what's known as a Lichtenberg pattern, which is a dendritic branch-like formation where that dielectric material will spontaneously transform from an insulator into a conductor. So these iron oxide veins are a preferential dielectric pathway for the flow of high voltage electric current from lightning. And this electric current was being distributed to all of the structures across the Giza Plateau. They're like wires.
Yeah.
So I can jump back now into, you wanted to see a Great Pyramid diagram. We can talk
Yeah, I
a little
want to
bit about
see
the function of the Great Pyramid.
yeah, I want to see some of the channels that you
Yep.
discovered that are next to the temple, and apparently they went underneath this temple into the Great Pyramid, and then I guess they exited somewhere as well.
Well, so I will say regarding the SAR team, in their initial scan of the Great Pyramid, they actually rediscovered the extraction shaft. So let me talk about how the Great Pyramid works, and I can run you through the whole thing in terms of the inlet and outlet within the Great Pyramid. Okay. Let me see here. We're going to share this. Fast forward for, if anybody wants to see the whole presentation on these slides, it's episode 165 on my channel. I also talk about the function of the serapeum. Americans usually say serapeum. In Egypt, they say serapeum. And I've picked up the Egyptian pronunciation. I always say serapeum. And
I hear what you're saying.
Time.
I got you.
I also talk about the function of the serapeum, which is for the production of hydrogen. So let me see here. Great Pyramid. So this is a quick animation of how the red pyramid works with that adiabatic compression reaction, where water is used to manipulate the volume of gases within the chamber system for the production of the aqueous ammonia solution. This is a diagram that shows the transformation of the Upper Eastern Sahara, where on the left here, it's 8,500 BC. It was a complete desert, but during the African Humid Period, the entire place turned into a huge farm. And I talk about that in episode 135, Pyramid Terraforming. Okay, so the Great Pyramid. We have a system of 4 chambers inside of the Great Pyramid. The lower subterranean chamber is a water pump.
Right.
So John Cadman did some really, really good work on the ram pump theory. However, he proposes that this shaft going out to the south of the subterranean chamber is the outlet shaft. I have been down inside of this shaft on numerous occasions, and I have video documentation at the end of the shaft. It is a complete dead end. There is no outlet in the subterranean chamber. So the only way this pump works is pumping water up through the well shaft into the internal reaction chamber system. And there's a lot of very interesting nomenclature when it comes to the names of the Egyptian pyramid components. The well shaft, for example, is the conventional archaeological name for this component. It's literally telling you exactly what it was for. What's a well? It's a source of water. And the well shaft is the source of water that pushes water from the subterranean pump up into the internal reaction chamber system. And the Great Pyramid operates in a relatively similar manner to our modern day contact process for the production of a dilute solution of sulfuric acid, where the king's chamber is a furnace chamber. That's why it has 2 air shafts, because combustion requires air. So the internal structure of the Great Pyramid, specifically the Grand Gallery, is designed to be filled and drained with water. By filling the Grand Gallery and then draining the Grand Gallery, you can pull air through the air shafts into the internal reaction chamber system. Okay, so this is from a paper that I recently presented on my members only channel showing the cave system below the Giza Plateau, which is the source of hydrogen sulfide gas. And going back to the SAR team, they're talking about the halls of Amenti in a city discovered below the Giza pyramids. Again, I disagree with the way that they are representing this data. It's not a city. It's not the halls of Amenti. There is a huge naturally occurring cave and tunnel system below the Giza Plateau. The Tomb of the Birds. Are you familiar with the Tomb of the Birds?
No, just Colin Andrews' book on the caves.
Yeah, yeah. So he was actually one of the first people to go down inside of this tunnel, and it's part of this naturally occurring iron ore permeated cave and tunnel system that runs below the Giza Plateau.
Hmm.
And that tunnel actually runs from the northwestern corner all the way into the central pyramid.
Wow.
It's a huge, huge tunnel. And this is a geological paper showing this cave and tunnel system that also includes huge vertical features. So the Giza Plateau, millions of years ago, was the bottom of an ocean. It's the
Wow.
bottom of the Tethys Sea. That's why there's all sorts of shells and fossils all over the Giza Plateau. It was literally the bottom of an ocean. That's how the Giza Plateau bedrock was formed.
Why
And
did
there
they
are huge.
select that area for this pyramid building, though? Is it because of the telluric energy or the ley lines were so strong in that area
Great
that's,
question.
yeah.
So the location for the construction of the Egyptian pyramids is directly related to these natural resources. For example, building the step pyramid in Saqqara on top of a huge deposit of bedrock methane. On the Giza Plateau, there is a source of hydrogen sulfide gas, a natural resource below the Giza Plateau. And that hydrogen sulfide gas is the raw material that was being converted into sulfur dioxide that was utilized for the chemical production within the Great Pyramid. Giza Plateau also has this huge iron vein network. It has all of these deposits of metal or minerals. It is the conjunction of the highest concentration of natural resources that also is directly associated with telluric current energy. The Giza Plateau being one of the highest concentrations of telluric current energy flow on the planet.
Right.
All of the ancient structures that I've talked about thus far, including stone circles, passage chamber reactors, and all of the Egyptian pyramids, it's a dual power source. Again, the product is not electricity. The pyramids were harnessing nature's electricity to produce chemicals. And that electrical power source, as above, so below, the old Hermetic axiom,
Yeah.
it comes from below, from telluric currents being induced up into the pyramid structure, and then from above, from lightning strikes on the top of these giant pyramids. I remember you were talking about my experience on the Giza Plateau the first time I went. I remember we were staying at the Mina House, and I was
Right.
looking from the restaurant at the Mina House having dinner, and I was like, if there was ever a lightning storm or a thunderstorm, these things are getting struck. They're the tallest thing that you can see from miles and miles and miles. There is absolutely nothing taller than the Egyptian pyramids on the horizon. They are
Right.
literally huge beacons to attract lightning.
Wow.
So I think we've already gone over our hour limit. I don't know how much
You got
time we
like
have or how far
another
I can go.
15 minutes to kind of close it up, kind of like give us. I'd like you to talk real briefly on if these guys were chemists, and obviously they are, and they're
Yes.
developing agricultural chemicals like ammonia and so forth and so on. What other chemicals do you suspect were being made that made them uniquely genius? Because this is the first theory that I've ever heard of as considering them chemists.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and I would say so. Going back to the function of the bent pyramid, I've proposed two different hypotheses for the function of the bent pyramid and the product thereof. So the most basic one would be converting the ammonia into a solid compound fertilizer, either urea or ammonium bicarbonate. Basically, very very similar chemical composition.
Right.
However, my preferred hypothesis for the function of the bent pyramid was that it was producing nitric acid, also by using aqueous ammonia as the initial reactant. So we have hydrochloric acid being produced in the central pyramid and nitric acid being produced in the bent pyramid. Have you ever heard of aqua regia?
No.
Oh, Okay, so aqua regia is perhaps the most important alchemical chemical that you could possibly make. Aqua regia is a combination of hydrochloric acid and nitric acid, and it is one of the only chemical solutions that can dissolve gold.
Hmm. No clue
So
why they
we
would have
know
wanted
that
to do that.
across the ancient, it gets into a very, very complicated subject. Anybody who's deep in the Anunnaki stuff, not really my bag, but they say that this civilization came here to mine gold, right? So
Right.
you need aqua regia for processing gold ore.
Ah,
And you can
okay.
also do something very, very special once you have dissolved gold. I won't say exactly what that is. I'm sure your listeners are like screaming at the thing, like, he knows. But there's a very specific reason that they were making aqua regia, which is a combination of nitric acid and hydrochloric acid. And you can dissolve gold to create a variety of things, including very, very pure gold. Um, so I also talk about Teotihuacan on my channel and how Teotihuacan, they found these quote unquote pools of liquid mercury
Yeah.
below Teotihuacan. Although I actually read your article on ancient origins, you wrote that article on the discovery on Teotihuacan,
Yeah.
also referencing, John Burke's work, Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty.
Right.
He's a fantastic researcher, and
Yeah.
there's a number of so shout out Hugh Newman, who actually gave your channel a very, very shining recommendation. And I also had a chance to meet Hugh for the first time in person in November of 2024.
Okay.
And he recommended that book, Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty.
It's
And I
amazing.
read it on the plane trip when we were heading to Japan last year. And there's a number of interesting similarities between his work. He also references lightning occurring at these structures. However, he thinks that it was an unwanted consequence, where I think it was actually the intention of the structures was to draw lightning strikes. He also talks about at the very end of the book the red pyramid producing atmospheric ammonia, but he talks about the outside of the structure, not the internal reaction chambers. And I would have loved to meet this guy and collaborate with him, but unfortunately, John Burke is no longer with us.
I
But a
know.
very,
Really
very
sad.
important book.
Yeah.
And again, I was absolutely thrilled to find similarities, but also some very big differences between my work and his work. Anyway, off track with Teotihuacan. So I think Teotihuacan, with the pyramid of the sun and the pyramid of the moon, right? So the sun is an alchemical symbol for gold.
Mm.
The moon is an alchemical symbol for silver. And you can use liquid mercury for processing both gold ore and silver ore.
Hmm.
So at the temple of Kukulkan or Quetzalcoatl at the Teotihuacan complex, again, we have this feathered serpent, dragon, lightning imagery. And
Right.
we've seen this again. I hate the diagram because people often present these diagrams with no explanation, but how Teotihuacan looks like a circuit board.
Yeah. Exactly.
So anytime you see Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan, think lightning.
Hmm.
Lightning is the electric current power source of the Teotihuacan circuit board complex.
Wow.
And that entire facility was utilized for metallurgy. They were using that liquid mercury. Again, I'm a little bit dubious of this archaeological discovery because in all of my research on Teotihuacan, I have never seen one single picture of these pools of liquid mercury. There's article after article after article saying that they discovered it, but I've never seen one image showing proof of that discovery. So there's some weird stuff going on with the archaeology regarding Teotihuacan. They're not releasing the data for some reason. But you have the pyramid of the sun for extracting gold, the pyramid of the moon for extracting silver, both by using liquid mercury, which can amalgamate gold and silver, which is a way to extract those precious metals from the ore.
Yeah. Amazing. We're gonna have to have you back, Geoffrey, and because you got just so much. I mean, I was looking at your YouTube channel. You must have you're over what 200 unique videos right now, right?
I think 360 research episodes.
Oh, 360. Oh my God. Amazing.
Correct.
Let people know how they
Yeah.
can get a
Which
hold
is
of you.
also a combination of about half of them are research episodes, and then the other half are on site expeditions. So when I moved to Egypt, I started a series called Sunday Site Visits, which is
Right.
every Sunday I go out to an ancient site and I show on site video documented evidence of my hypothesis.
Wow.
And, we go out to all the sites in Egypt, all my footage from special permission access. We also did an extensive research expedition going to Avebury and Stonehenge and Newgrange in Ireland. We did a big UK research expedition. And then
Yeah.
also our stuff from Japan, investigating the pyramid Coromanta, the Oyu stone circles,
Yeah.
some of the bizarre quarries and other ancient sites here. Again, all the ancient stuff in Japan is like you plucked it out of the UK and stuck it in the middle of a field in Japan. They have the exact same type of stuff here in Japan.
I've always thought that somebody had a master plan, like a blueprint that they would send around to the different parts of the world, and then everyone would make their version of Stonehenge or their version of Avebury,
Absolutely.
but the
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that.
yeah. Can let people know how they
It
can get
was
a
it's
hold of you, Geoffrey, and also give us details on this upcoming tour so people might be interested in checking it out. What's your website?
Yeah, so my website is thelandofchem.com if you want to pick up a copy of the book or grab some Land of Chem merch, shameless plug. It's the land of CHEM, as in the land of chemistry. My YouTube handle is also the same, the Land of Chem. You can
Right.
follow me on Instagram or on X at the Land of Chem. And I do have it's either the fourth or fifth Ancient Alchemy and Ascension tour coming up in November. And if people are interested, they can just send me an email, contact at thelandofchem.com. It's an all inclusive 13-day tour covering every structure that we talked about. My work also encompasses like the function of the Osirion
Yeah.
temple in Abydos,
Weird
the
building.
function of Luxor temple, the function of Karnak temple. We'll be visiting all of those. We're going to go down to the red granite quarry in Aswan to see the unfinished obelisk, Elephantine Island, Abu Simbel, everything, Nile cruise. It's an awesome tour. Send me an email again, contact at thelandofchem.com, subject line 2025 Egypt tour. I'm sure you can tell I have done that plug before.
Hey, man, real pleasure having you on the program. Let's do it again. And
Yeah,
thanks
I'd
for,
be happy to come on. And if we do another one, I can focus on each type of structure individually
yeah,
because I can very easily do an hour just on stone circles. I could do an hour just on Newgrange, and then we can break down each individual pyramid in a specific episode because it's my work is so comprehensive that it's
yeah.
almost impossible for me to cover everything. So for anybody that wants more detail, just go check out the Land of Chem on YouTube and dive in head first
Man,
down
Egypt's
the rabbit
great, but
hole.
we got a lot of people covering Egypt. I'll tell you, I have only had one person cover megalithic Japan. So you're there, and if you've been doing research, I would love to have a program just on that because those
Oh,
ruins
I'd
are
love to.
just mind-blowing. They're just, I mean, we're talking about megaliths equal to the size of Stonehenge or any of the largest stones we see in Europe. So pretty
Yeah, the
amazing.
the Kanayama megaliths,
Yeah,
Japanese Stonehenge.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Japanese Stonehenge is a crazy site, and I have a bunch of footage on my channel. Again, this Sunday site visit series from our Japan expeditions. If anybody's interested in that, check out the I think it's just Japan research. I have a bunch of playlists on my
Yeah.
channel, so if anybody's interested in specific areas of my research, just check out the playlist, and you can watch through the whole thing from start to finish.
Yeah, good stuff, Jeff. Hey, man, thanks a lot. I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Cliff. Thank you so much. Look forward to doing it again.